I've come to tell you what I see. There are great darknesses.
You kill me, bitch. That's the joke of all time.
Keep away from the windows. Somebody might blow you a kiss.
Silencio. Silencio.
Don't you like the taste of blood?
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Beale.
I shall now count from 1 to 10.
We're gonna get done, dude!
He hates these cans!
Welcome to the Church of Cinematic Oblivion. I'm Nick.
And I'm Harry, and today we are talking about the Saragossa Manuscript from 1965.
Today we are talking about the Saragossa Manuscript, which is based on the novel, which I just finished reading 20 minutes ago, The Manuscript Found in Saragossa by Jan Potocki.
Yeah, and the movie that we're talking about today from 1965 was directed by Wojciech Has and stars the late, great Zbigniew Cybulski. Am I saying that right?
Zbigniew Cybulski. We got that pronunciation from Martin Scorsese, so blame him if we got it wrong.
And the shocking performance by Zbigniew Cybulski.
Okay. This is how I want to open things up. Jan Potocki, who wrote the book, he was a traveler of the world. And you can tell that in the story and in the movie and in the book because it blends all these different cultures together and all these different religions together. And it's really about how all these different philosophies and ways of thinking and ethnicities come to meet in the Mediterranean region of Spain. Now, I want to open this up with kind of a geographical curiosity. So if you're at home, get out your phone. Harry, you can be my volunteer from the audience. Get out your phone. Go to whatever your favorite Maps app is. If you're driving, just let me describe this for you. Don't do it because, pay attention to the road. But anyone who's not driving...
I think you should do it anyway.
No, you definitely should not do it anyway. But if you're not driving, open up your phone, open up your favorite Maps app, and type in Vulcan Point Island. Tell me when you got it, Harry.
Vulcan Point Island.
So you're going to need to go to a Maps app that isn't going to just constrict you to local stuff. Do you have it?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, so Vulcan Point Island.
In
you see it? You see it? Now stay close on it.
It's in a lake.
Stay close on it, right?
Okay.
Okay, now it's in a lake. You're right. That's called Crater Lake, right? You can see that?
It is called Bukang Tal. I don't know how that pronounces.
We're not going to even try.
Probably Crater Lake.
Okay, now what I want
you to... the Crater Lake.
Now what I want you to do, Harry, is I want you to very slowly zoom out. What do you see? Describe it.
I see an island in a lake, inside an island in a lake. Yes, at the point right below Manila.
Tell the microphone.
I see an island inside of a lake that is on a island that is inside of a bigger lake that is at like the southernmost point of the Philippines, the main Filipino island.
Which is an island in the ocean.
Yes, which I should say is an island in the ocean.
So what we've got here is we've got the essence of the Saragossa Manuscript.
Oh my God.
Do you see what I'm saying?
You're such a nerd.
Do you get it though?
Yeah.
So
it's a dream inside of a dream. It's the inception of Polish cinema.
I feel like I did a really classy analogy and you just went straight to Inception.
Yeah, dude.
This is about nested stories. This is about someone telling a story, about someone telling them a story, about someone who once told them a story.
And we counted, it goes 6 layers deep.
Yeah, it's like the play within a play in Hamlet.
Huh?
Let's see. It's like when you watch old home movies of you watching TV.
Gotcha.
6 layers deep.
At its deepest point. Usually it's only 3 layers. It hovers around 3 layers at most of the time.
Yeah.
Because the main bulk of the story takes place in the second layer.
In the second layer. In fact, you only get the beginning as the first layer.
The first layer is about a 5-minute sequence.
Yeah, and then you never come back out of it. So we live our lives in the second layer.
Well, let's at least give a setup about what the movie is. So we start out in the Napoleonic Wars. So we start off in the early 1800s, right? And a French and a Spanish soldier, the French guy is they're raiding a town, and they come to a house, and he finds a manuscript in the house, and he starts looking through it. And then it cuts to what he's reading in the manuscript, and that's layer 2.
Right. And then the bulk of the story is our protagonist, Alphonse von Warden of the Walloon Guard is traveling through the haunted Sierra Morena mountains. He encounters sexy ladies, demonic people who are possessed,
ghosts,
many Muslims, Christians, Jews.
A lot of religious figures, and they all have stories to tell, and we explore the stories that they tell him while his story gets more complex and more intriguing.
Right. And so at times we are with Alphonse and his story, but at times we are for hours at a time.
The majority of the movie we spend inside other stories.
Immersed inside other people's stories. That's what kind of makes it interesting.
Yeah, so it doesn't really have one plot. It's really about... It's very much that classical folklore tradition, like you said, Canterbury Tales or Arabian Nights, where it is about the multiple plots interweaving inside of each other.
So I wanted to thank you for leading me into that. Yes, this is directly a reference to the tradition that we see in the Bible, the Metamorphosis by Ovid, the Arabian Nights, the Canterbury Tales, the Decameron, which lead me to decide that we should definitely do a Trilogy of Life episode later. And, of course, the Canadian opus of the Midnight Society, who meets up in the woods to dispel the demons of the night. You know?
What?
So Are You Afraid of the Dark is also clearly inspired
Christ.
by this storytelling thing. The thing that's always interesting is you have some investment in the frame, and then you end up inside a story, and you get lost in there for so long you forget the frame even existed.
Well, the other thing about this format is that it's the same with anthologies, where you're like, oh, if this story, you get into one story and then that story's over, or you cut out of it, and that's a bummer. But then if you get into a story you don't like, you're like, oh, well, it'll probably be over soon.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's like tapas, and it's Spanish.
Yeah,
so that makes sense.
There you go. Wow, it all wraps around. So this is also a Polish movie based on a novel written by a Polish man, but the majority of the movie takes place in Spain.
Yeah, it's and what's funny is also that the book that I was reading was written in Polish and French.
Okay.
So this guy, Jan Potocki, let me pause. Oh no, I'm going to let you talk about the movie and then I'll talk about him. But he spoke a lot of languages.
No, do the book first.
Do you want me to talk about him?
We'll
for a
go
sec?
in chronological. We'll do the book, then we'll do the movie.
There's so much to say about the book, and I'm not going to say it all here. A lot's going to come up as we go. But Jan Potocki or Potocki, I don't know.
Doesn't matter. Polish names are some of the hardest names to pronounce.
He was a well-known kind of anthropologist. He explored different cultures, much like a lot of that's how he was able to draw on so many cultures. He was an intellectual. He spoke a ton of different languages, and he had 2 wives, which is funny because 2 wives keeps coming up a lot in this one. I think he had them at different times, although I guess
right. No, this is specifically
he fantasized that he had them at the same time.
About
basically this whole book is about
the whole movie's about threesomes. We should say
the whole book is about 3 things: threesomes, the rise of Shia Islam,
really?
and stories within stories within stories and the nature of the universe.
Right. The rise of Shia Islam was definitely downplayed a little bit in the movie.
In the book, it's very prominent.
Yeah.
In fact, I can draw direct.
A lot
links.
of people in the movie try to get you to convert to Islam.
I can draw direct historical lines between the events of the book and the rise of ISIS right now.
Well, let's not do that.
We will be doing that at the end. I can give you direct quotes even. Like you can see the plans for ISIS being formed in the book.
I'm chill. You can do your own podcast about that.
Well, I will bring it up at the end. But the point is that, all those things are kind of what it's really about. 3 ways and devils. And, you were talking about vignette things, and I wanted to briefly reference that there's a lot of popular horror vignette stuff like Tales from the Crypt and Creepshow and the entire tradition of EC horror stories. And though some of these stories are kind of funny, and some of them are really funny, and some of them are really sexy, and some of them are really satirical, there are plenty that are pretty gross and grotesque and violent.
It's very...
And horror and full of monsters.
Well, I guess I'll say it's horror in content, but not at all in style. And we'll get into that when we dissect the movie a little bit, that's actually one of my complaints, is that a lot of the horror isn't horror enough. There are a lot of monsters and demons and ghosts, and they are genuinely creepy looking, and the makeup is good, and they're like creepy. But the way it's portrayed in that very folklore style where it's just a part of the universe. So no one is shocked or scared by it as much.
Yes.
And it's also treated comically in a lot of ways.
Right, exactly. So, do you have any other facts or thoughts? I want to hear your notes about the film before I kind of just start going into scene breakdowns and philosophical discussions.
Well, are you done talking about introing the book?
Well, okay, so the book, just, I guess, to say a little more. Oh, the one thing I wanted to say, this is the big fact about Jan Potocki. I'm going to call him Jan Potocki from now on.
That's fine.
Tell me if that's...
No one's going to give you
Tell
shit.
me if that's wrong.
Our Polish fan base will write hate,
It's
man.
probably pretty big at this point. So Jan Potocki killed himself with a silver bullet that he'd made from something he had around the house that he melted down. And he had it blessed by a priest first, shot himself in the head. So the guy probably was a werewolf. And that's very much like one of the stories in this book.
Yeah, seriously.
The book is basically the same as the movie. The movie was a very faithful adaptation, except for the fact
that it cut a lot out.
It's like 25%. And that's okay, because there is so much in this book. I think the point of it is to have that real, intense, sprawling feel, like it's just these immensity of mysteries that you'll never uncover everything. You know? And if I reread this book, I could probably trace historical lines to just kind of everything going on in the world.
These stories and see if they're based in anything?
A lot of them are. He didn't make these all up. Yeah. A lot of them are traditional folktales you've heard before or stories from other books, but combined in an interesting way.
Okay, so it is all, but are they all? It's all not all Polish folklore. It's mostly Spanish folklore.
It's folklore from everywhere, dude.
Yeah.
It begins with a lot of Spanish ghost and vampire folklore. Then it kind of enters into a lot of Spanish satires of honor and courtly love romances, people cheating on their husbands and stuff. And then it ends with very Arabian Nights style genealogy of the major Islamic families that you can draw a direct line to the current state of the Middle East.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Honestly.
The other thing you said about the book is that it takes place all over the world.
Yeah, it does. Well, it mostly, just like the movie, it takes place a lot in Spain, but there are parts in Africa, parts in Egypt, there are parts in other parts of Europe.
The movie takes place entirely in Spain. The first half takes place entirely in this mountain range, and then the second half takes place mostly in Madrid.
There are actually sections of the book in North and South America, too.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
What year was it written?
I think it was written in 1809. I think it was written in not all at once. It came out like a little bit at a time, as books did back then. And it was the work of several years. And even in the introduction, it was talking about how like the first 10 days of the story arrived way before the rest of it did. Right. So I think that the edition I saw was published around 1809. Didn't get an English translation until around 1989, which means that the movie was made when there was no extant English book to read of it at all. It was just a movie. And it was Jerry Garcia's favorite movie.
It was also one of Louis Buñuel's favorite movies. He apparently watched it 3 times, which he only ever watched movies once.
Well, what's interesting is that Louis Buñuel is a very
big influence. So this movie is, we should say, in the tradition of surrealist film, which was very much emerging at the time of 1965. It opens with these incredible surreal paintings with the credits scrolling over them. They look very Dali or like Giorgio Chirico, like very much that tradition of painting. I did a lot of searching, and I could not find out who the painter is who did the 3 paintings we see at the beginning. But they're very much like an overture for the imagery in the film.
Right.
So very much, a lot of the images in the film, like there's a part where you see a glove with a knife stabbed in it and snakes surrounding it. They're very much based in the tradition of surrealist painting more than the tradition of surrealist filmmaking.
Right.
And we'll talk about that if we ever talk about Buñuel or, Marcel Duchamp or any of that shit. Because that stuff is surrealist film, but it doesn't use the same type of painterly imagery that this movie uses.
It's interesting you mentioned that because, of course, if anyone listening has seen only one movie of the kind you're describing, they've probably seen An Andalusian Dog or Un Chien Andalusia. And what's interesting about that is that's Dali and Buñuel, and that movie tries to kind of recreate the look of surrealist paintings in film. And this movie takes place in a few different Spanish cities, including Andalusia. Right. So it's still got that Spanish surrealist influence, even though it was written by a Polish author and directed by a Polish director.
Yeah, and this movie also should be known, it came out 50 years after Andalusian Dog.
Yeah.
53 years.
Yeah. So it's the next generation of this kind of thing.
But it's more, I would say it's more based on, anyway, it doesn't matter. We'll move on. But yeah, very huge, Buñuel influence in this movie. And very much a Fellini influence too, I think.
Oh, totally. I think that something that's interesting about this film is that it has all the trappings of like an artsy European film because it's really long and it has a lot of dated concepts that are made stories of, and it's black and white and it's European. And so when I first saw this film, I was 15 and I watched it because I wanted to be like smart and cool. And there are plenty of European films of that like kind of those qualities that bored the shit out of me, and I wanted to like them, and I wanted to be intellectual, and I couldn't like them. And this one was really easy to get into even when I was young because and I realized this when I got older, it's sexy, it's gory, and it's funny.
Yeah, it's very funny. Yeah, we laughed a lot watching this
laughed
movie.
Super loud.
And it's funny in a way that A, translates to another culture, and B, holds up with time, which is that it's silly.
It's really silly.
Characters have silly mannerisms, they make silly faces and silly noises. Like, it's very farcical and like over the top in a lot of ways.
The film has a ton of farce. The book has a ton of satire. The film is a lot of really, really good physical performances by some of the characters who are in the book satired. and these are characters who are usually one of the running themes of the entire book is, and I'll get. Why don't I get into this right now? Is honor and chivalry. And back in those days, people lived by these really, really important codes of honor and chivalry, and there are a lot of stories of people making a promise or a vow or swearing something. You see this a lot in the Knights of the Round Table and the Mabinogion and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight.
Every sort of like heroic epic,
and it's really, really, and then it's pretty much usually satirized. It's shown to be ridiculous. For example, like one of the early stories in the movie that they depict, and there are countless of these in the beginning of the book,
is the story of Alfonso's dad.
Yeah, Alfonso's dad was a famous dueler. In the book, he's a better dueler than he is in the film. In the film, he's more of like a jackass.
Right.
He duels over everything, and in the opening scene that we see him in the film, he's driving his carriage, and another carriage runs past and basically cuts him off in traffic and knocks him over.
Yeah.
Then he gets to the bar where the guy who just cut him off is, and he goes, "Sir,
Senior?
You knocked over my carriage?
Pańska kareta, senior, wyprzedziła mój powóz.
I want you to pause eating and come duel me."
Ma to w sobie coś obraźliwego, z czego chciałbym, abyś się, senior, wytłumaczył.
And the guy says, "You know what?
Senior, wydaje mi się, że to nie moi pocztylioni wyprzedzili pańskich. Ale pańscy wlokąc się pozostali w tyle.
You were going too slow. So fine." And he goes out and he duels him, and they bow to each other several times.
Well, no, the thing is, he pulls out his sword and he goes, "You will duel me because you knocked my carriage over." And he goes, "Actually, you were going too slow." And he goes, "Oh, I wish you'd said that before I pulled out my sword."
Przyznaję panu słuszność. Szkoda jednak, że nie uczynił pan tego spostrzeżenia, zanim dobyłem szpady.
And then he's like, he knows he's wrong, but he still has to duel because it's his honor code.
Yeah.
And that comes up throughout the movie, that honor is like a self-imposed obstacle. And it's hilarious how much these like poor fools, trip over themselves to maintain their honor. Especially Alfonso, who everything he does is to maintain his honor, but he's like a bumbling oaf.
Now, there are literally hundreds of examples of these hilarious satires of honor, and lots of examples of someone making a promise and then realizing, oh no, I promised something I can't grant.
Yeah.
Just so much of that, or so many. There's one where a woman's like, "I would only love you if you would also do everything I said, including not loving me. And so I order you to marry my sister." And he goes, "But I love you." And she goes, "If you really love me, you'll do everything I say, including not loving me." Yeah, in the book. This isn't in the movie. And then he finds out, "Oh, I am my sister, and you proved yourself." But anyway, so there's a lot of satired honor in that way, and it's pretty hilarious.
So let's say the movie is broken into two main chunks.
Yeah.
The first chunk
literally,
is...
literally two
literally
parts.
part one, part two.
There's an intermission.
There's just a title that says it. And the part one is Alfonso wandering around Sierra Montana mountains and this inn called the Venta Quemada, and running into primarily these two women who are sisters at the inn.
Amina and Zubeida,
who constantly try to get him to have threesomes with them.
Czy to ja?
Tak, ta myśl podobała nam się najbardziej.
Ale moja religia, moje święte dogmaty,
Czy nie podobamy ci się, Alfonsie?
Ależ tak bardzo.
Nie jesteśmy dość miłe.
Jesteście.
Już dnieć zaczyna. Zbyt drogie są godziny, aby je marnować dla pustych słów.
Constantly. And also...
But they'll only do it if he converts to Islam.
Right, and that's where we start to get this thread of the rising Shia Islam in the world.
Well, it's also because Spain used to be an Islamic country.
Yeah.
And so this was like at a time when Catholicism had taken over Spain and the Inquisition was driving out the remaining Muslims and Jews, which the Inquisition plays a character in this movie as well.
Right, so all of these threads are constantly interrupted by other threads, and what really makes the movie interesting is the interlacing of all these threads.
Yeah.
But just to make it easy for you to draw this line straight to the end, what eventually happens is that the entire plot is to get him to fall in love and impregnate Amina and Zubeida, because they are of the Gomelez family, who we've revealed in the books to have been living underground in Spain for generations, trying to launch a Muslim uprising in Europe again.
Yeah, that wasn't in the movie, though.
But it is at the end when they tell him, like, now you've impregnated them and you're
right.
going...
But the Muslim uprising isn't. In the movie, they just keep trying to get him to have a threesome with them unless he converts to Islam, and he keeps like saying no because I'm a Catholic by honor, blah blah blah. And then he keeps waking up underneath the hanged men. Mm-hmm. And also Amina and Zabina tell a story about their mother, who was the product of, what is it?
Oh, that's very complicated.
I don't know. The mother is a whole ghost also.
Well, Umina and Zubaydah grew up alone in the harem and had never seen a man before him, and then they were so bonded at that point that they only wanted to have one husband. It's a perfect male fantasy.
Just talk about the movie now.
No, that's in the movie.
It is?
As soon as he meets them, he's like, they're like, we never met a man. We grew up in the harem. We grew to love each other, and we decided that we will only have one husband.
Oh.
And that's the first scene with them. They say that. And then he goes, oh, great. And then they go, but you should convert to the religion of the prophet, and then you can have both of us. And they keep selling it. They keep selling Islam as like,
it's a good sell.
Sexy wives, multiple sexy wives, who, by the way, are Polish white ladies dressed in Egyptian clothing.
They're supposed to be from
Tunisia.
That's it.
Yeah.
So that's the majority of the first story is that, but also there are these really cool, and this is my favorite part of the movie, there are all these just cool ghost stories that he gets told and that he experiences in around Monte Quevedo and the Sierra Montana.
Yep.
And like he runs into the two bandits who have come back from the dead and the man who's possessed by a demon, and like all that stuff is so fun and so memorable and like really cool imagery and just like a really good. The first hour and a half of this movie is like a really good horror comedy with like some pretty beautiful imagery.
So you're totally right. The mountains, just to clarify, are the Sierra Morena mountains.
Oh, whatever.
Just so you know. And the geography of this is a amalgam collage of real geography. It's fictional geography. It doesn't really look like this. And there's a whole note at the beginning of the book that's like, it doesn't really look. This isn't real. All these cities aren't in this order. But I really like how you mentioned that the beginning is like a horror comedy, because one of my favorite early stories that really puts it in that vein is Pacheco the demoniac.
Yeah, Pacheco, the guy who's possessed by the demon.
Pacheco, zrób mi miejsce koło siebie, drżęś. Pacheco, pozwól się nam przytulić, to ja twoje
Odejdź ode mnie, szatanie.
And it shows that in very similar vein to our hero Alphonse, Pacheco was lured into a three-way with his dad's wife, his stepmom, and his step-aunt.
Right, who was the one he was actually after.
But then in the morning, he realized he was actually having sex with two dead dudes.
Yeah, the ghosts of the hanged men, Zotar and whatever their names are.
And one of them reaches in and pulls out one of his eyes.
Yeah.
Very Tales from the Crypt.
And it's like a pretty gruesome, bloody, like,
image. I could totally picture a Tales from the Crypt where someone's like, I want to bang my dad's hot wife and her sister.
No, seriously.
And then you wake up in the morning and, we're the dead guys. And
yeah.
You're
That's under like the
perfect, easy comics.
Hangman's gallows, and they pull your eye out. And the only problem is it's not done. It's done very. And this is my thing with the whole movie. You said it's like a European art house film, but it's not arty enough to be a true art film in the way that it's made, and it's not horror enough to be an art. The way that there's not a lot interesting going on with the technical filmmaking. Mm-hmm. It's very traditionally shot and edited, and it's good at capturing what it's capturing, but it's really just kind of about these stories, and the filmmaking itself is not the art there. The sound editing is really great. There's this very Lynchian soundscapes throughout the whole thing.
Totally.
And really cool traditional music. Mm-hmm. But the actual like cinematography and editing is kind of like could have been more to make this movie, to really elevate this movie next step. Like it's almost, I don't know, it's just not arty enough to be like a Fellini or an Ingmar Bergman movie.
Right. No, it's done straight. It's played straight. It's played flat. The actors don't, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but they don't really get to inhabit the roles like in an Oscar sense of like, I lived for a month as Alphonse in the desert.
Yeah.
Because they're all just like theatrically, almost like puppets in a stage play, just playing these characters. And that's, I think, a result of the fact that we are layers deep in a story. And also, at the end, I'm going to go ahead and give away the ending here, although in the book this ending isn't as explicit. The movie kind of implies sort of a Wizard of Oz ending.
Like it might have all been a dream, but maybe it was all real.
So in the book, and this also happens in the movie, it is revealed to Alphonse at the end that a lot of the people he's met were actually designed to delay him in the mountains long enough that he could inherit his Gomelez Muslim family dynasty. His 2 wives impregnate them with his heir and receive all this gold from inside the mountain. And so a lot of the people were, including Pacheco, who they even say in the movie was an acrobat who just lost one eye, who was pretending to be possessed. We're just there to delay him long enough that he could kind of go through all his Gomelez
Which was really kind of disappointing for me, because, like, I want the monsters to be real. I want there to be, you know, ghosts and zombies and demonic possessed people and, like...
Right. And in the book, there's the character of the Wandering Jew, who they reveal at the end to just be an actor who was hired to play the Wandering Jew.
Oh, really?
So, like, so we are never sure if any of the demonic stuff is real or not.
In the book, too, it's also
not real. Although, they do take... it seems to me that vampires are real in the book. They go over vampires a lot, and they make a distinction. I don't need to read the exact quote I'm looking for, but they make a distinction between Polish and Hungarian vampires, which are the kind we all know, that like demons who wake up from the dead and drink blood, and Spanish vampires, which are just like spirits that inhabit any dead body they come across. And so they imply throughout the whole movie that these kind of wandering spirits that inhabit whatever body they want are the 2 hanged men, are Zubeda and Amina, are every duo of women,
but also the
someone has a
hanged
three-way.
men who were the 2 bandits that got caught aren't actually the 2 bandits. The 2 bandits are still alive.
No, just 2 random shepherds got hung in their place.
Yeah, there's a lot of confusing
substitution.
Yeah,
right. And so at the end, it's maybe implied that a lot of the people who Alphonse saw earlier then became other characters in the stories, kind of like the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Lion and the Wizard of Oz. And in that way, it makes more sense that the characters are played a little flat because they're more just like stand-ins than they are real characters, you know?
Yeah.
So
So
images.
the first part is all these great ghost stories and vampire stories and monsters. And then part 2 comes, and the entire part 2 is just one story. It's the gypsy story. And there are layers to that story and a couple little side stories. But the majority of it is the gypsy story told...
And that's true in the book, too.
Told in the Kabbalist's mansion.
Right.
And the Kabbalist also represents another end of the mystical religion. There's a lot of... The mystical ends of religions are clashing in this desert. So we spend the first half with the mystical Muslim women, and now we spend the second half with the mystical Jewish man. Although he doesn't really do anything. He doesn't talk. He doesn't tell a story. I mean, he talks. He doesn't tell us a long story about Kabbalism. He just mentions that he's a Kabbalist.
In the book, he tells plenty of stories. And Rebecca, his daughter, kind of stands in for... Or no, his sister. She kind of stands in for him, although at the end we find out she's secretly Muslim, too.
Oh, God. Aren't they all, right?
But I think that... just to finish out what you're saying, so the first half of the story is mostly these little kind of folktale horror stories, and the second half of the story is mostly satires of honor and courtly romances.
This one long, like, love affair story. And here's the thing. This is kind of where the movie doesn't fall off. I still think it's a great movie, but this is where it kind of gets boring for me.
I totally disagree.
You should have... It becomes a romantic comedy, and it's genuinely very funny. Like, I was laughing throughout the whole movie. And we meet Bosquero in the second half, and he's our funniest character easily. And his relationship with the timid son of the banker is really funny.
Suarez.
The way he pushes around Lopez Suarez. Lopez Suarez, whatever. And, like, all that stuff is really funny. But it's just, like, I wanted more monsters. I wanted more demons. You teased us with all this great horror and monsters and vampires, and then it's all gone.
And
we just have a love affair story.
And yet, it's kind of like in the second half, the veil is pulled back because the most interesting thing about the Bosquero and Lope Suarez story is not just that it's hilarious, which it is, because Bosquero and Lope Suarez are this hilarious odd couple where Lope Suarez is this timid little wimp, and Bosquero is this hilarious gallivanting cad.
Yeah.
And
Bosquero is very much T.J. Miller on Silicon Valley.
Yeah, right.
That's
exactly.
what he reminded me of.
Very much like
overly confident, more so than his actual
He's
talents.
a far sadder character in the book.
Yeah.
His entire existence is based on meddling in other people's affairs.
Right.
But anyway, the second half of the book is interesting, not just because, the second half of the movie rather, and the book is interesting not only because it's hilarious in the movie. It's hilarious with Bosquero.
He comes up to tell the woman something, and he has a dog, and then the next day he comes to give her another info, and he's a different dog.
And he just randomly decides to grab things out of people's hands a lot. And also, he comes up every time Suarez is talking to a girl, and he tries to like be his bro, like Entourage style, and he just always busts his.
Whenever
style
Lope
up.
Suarez sits down to a meal, Bosquero shows up, and Lope Suarez, without even asking, like moves the plate over.
He's
so that he
that
can eat
classic. We've all had one, the bully friend, who's you want want him in your corner, but he's terrible. But anyway, the interesting thing about it is that it's nested 4 layers deep, then it goes 5, then it goes 6. So let's break it down. The first layer is that you've got the people who found the Saragossa Manuscript.
Right, which is the constant first layer.
The second layer, which is where we spend most of the movie, is Alphonse wandering around the mountains hearing stories from people. The third layer is that the gypsy is telling Alphonse a story. The fourth layer is that the gypsy, in his story, goes into a hospital and meets Lope Suarez, who tells him a story of being in a park and hearing a story from Busquero.
Well, there are a couple of those. We go to different 5. So we have Lope Suarez. Within Lope Suarez, we have his father's story about the banker Moro. Right? Then we have Busquero's. This is when it goes to 6 layers. Busquero's story about the affair he's having with the woman. And then the woman tells a story about her husband.
And we go into the 6th layer. And that's what I was actually going to say, because you were saying that there's no monsters in Act 2. And there
is
are
a monster for a moment.
But they're fake. No, the whole point is that we're having the veil pulled back now, because what I think is maybe the moment I laughed the hardest in the whole movie is that he meets this woman who in the book I think is called Senor Usqueres, but she has another name that's sort of a pun on the word cuckold because her husband is a cuckold. So basically there's a plot line where she's been trying to gaslight her husband. She's driving him insane.
Well, he put out a hit on a person who doesn't exist.
She set him up to kill someone who's not real, to drive him crazy, like Telltale
so
Heart
that she
style.
can make him think he's being haunted by the ghost of. So he pays 100 shekels to get this person doubloons to get this person murdered, and she wakes him up in the night by showering 100 doubloons on his head and calling into a vase, "I am the ghost. I've come back for you." And it's really funny. He runs out of the room screaming.
Just to be clear, convincing your romantic partner that they're crazy is never okay in real life. But
you guys should do it. You guys should try it.
In this situation, it's fucking hilarious because
it's all just silly. It's very comical, like over the top, translatable silliness.
But then, her husband on one night runs out an actual bloody zombie dude does come in the window, and her husband runs out the door, and then he gets chased down, and the guy says, "I am a Satanist. I work for the devil. I'm the man you had killed, or I know the man you have killed," and it's all fake. So how is this happening? And this is where we kind of verge off into Are You Afraid of the Dark level horror, where it's like you made something up off the top of your head, and then it came true.
Right.
And he stabs him.
Kto jesteś?
Ten znak dowodzi, że jestem we władzy szatana.
Nie.
And it's kind of brutal, but it's also all part of this hilarious farce of horror. You know?
Right.
So, yeah, it's different genres. That's the whole point of it.
But that's only once, I don't know. The last hour and a half is just kind of like interweaving love stories.
Courtly romances. And like very Shakespearean style comedies in the sense that like... And they left this out of the edition of the book I actually read. It was apparently only in the edition which has not been translated. The end of the story where Daddy Suarez says, "Son, you can never marry a Moreau. You can never even talk to a Moreau. And you can never pull your sword out. And you can never use the title Don.
Yeah.
And you can never talk to noblemen." And then basically at the end of the story, Busqueres, who turns out to be useful in this situation, tricks the dad into becoming his friend, into pulling out his sword, and into kneeling to Lady Moreau. And when he starts to lecture his son, he goes, "Oh, but you just did all those things yourself."
Yeah.
And so the whole affair is wrapped up in a nice little bow.
Yeah.
Like a Shakespeare comedy. And you're right. It's it's a little hokey.
It's also Shakespeare in the level of complexity, because there are characters introduced who something will happen, and then an hour later you kind of see it happen from another perspective.
Right.
Specifically
The
with
Rashomon effect.
the voice of the dead. There's a part which is another pulling back the veil, where a man's friend has died, and then there's a stormy night, and he hears moaning out his window, and he calls out, he goes, "Is that you? Are you dead?" And he hears a voice go, "I am dead." And he's like, "Is there a purgatory in the afterlife?" And he goes, "Yes, there is. I'm in it."
Czy jest czyściec na tamtym świecie? Jest!
And then an hour later, we find out that was Lope Suarez, who had fallen off of a balcony and landed in a bucket, and it wasn't actually the voice of the dead.
Czy zginąłeś? Zginąłem! ja się w nim znajduję.
So like Rashomon, because we see the story from different perspectives and just like interlocking jokes and plot lines that fulfill each other.
They chose to go way more physical with that joke in the film, which I really appreciated. In the book, in that scene, so once again, what Harry said, this guy's friend who went to duel said, if I die, my ghost will come back and tell you whether there's an afterlife.
Yeah.
And then he thinks he hears his friend say, I am dead and I'm in there is a purgatory and I am in it. In the book, it turns out that that's Senor Don Lopez, who got knocked off the window and was in great pain and thought the man meant to kill him. And so he said, yeah, I'm dead. And he said, are you in purgatory? And he says, I thought my pain was like purgatory. So I said, yes. But in the movie, they chose to go more physical with it. He falls into a barrel, head down, and then he goes, are you in purgatory? And he says, yes. Or he says, is there a purgatory? Yes, and I am in it. And the image of him being in a barrel upside down and the barrel being like purgatory and him being like so confused and maybe concussed that he thinks that like purgatory is an upside down barrel is really funny.
Yeah.
That's like a funny detail. And yeah, so there's that Rashomon effect of seeing this from different perspectives, of seeing different people's ways of seeing the same event and realizing, I don't want to get into this too much. There's a whole analysis you could go for with it where it's all about the unreliable narrator. Just like great stories like by Faulkner or The Yellow Wallpaper or anything like that. You can never be sure of what you're hearing.
Well, then at the end, you find out that most of it probably was fake.
Yeah.
From the Sheik.
Yeah.
Well, the thing I didn't understand in the movie, and I guess doesn't really need to make sense, is what is the plot of delaying Alfonso in the desert? Like, why stop him and tell him all these stories? So he can inherit his fortune?
Yeah.
Wasn't he going to inherit that? Like, why does that matter? And why him?
Okay, so no, it was just like with everyone else in their annoying codes of honor. It was a giant test. So at the beginning of his entry into the desert, he met his two sexy cousins. They had chastity belts on and said, we'll do everything above the waist until you convert to Islam. Eventually, they gave in and he impregnated them anyway. But then they said, you got to make one more promise, and that's that you won't tell anyone about us, no matter what.
No.
And even though through hundreds of stories he heard people mentioning them, and he was always about to be like, I know them, he didn't. And then at the end, the guy said, we tested you hundreds of times to see if you'd break your promise, and you never did.
Jesteś bowiem jedynym męskim potomkiem naszego ginącego rodu. Wszystko, co przeżyłeś, było z góry ukartowaną grą, mającą wypróbować twój honor i odwagę.
They don't go into all the complications. And maybe, since we're talking about this, I can pause briefly to draw a direct line between the Gomelez Muslim family who lived in subterranean networks beneath Granada, Spain, and current state of the Middle East. So I just want to read you one quote real quick here from the end. So, in the end, the last story we get in the book, you don't get this in the movies, the Sheik describes the history of the Gomelez family, which Alphonse belongs to, and which he's meant to inherit. So the Sheik is telling his whole crazy story about falling in love with some beautiful woman who knew all the crazy cave networks underneath, and of realizing his family went back to the ancient dynasty of like the first Shias who knew Ali, the guy who they all like. And he's driven out of Tunis or Egypt or wherever by the Shias. I mean, by the Sunnis, because he's Shia. At one point, he's thrown into a cave full of crocodiles. And then he says this, which I was just like, whoa, this is weird. So this was a group of people who didn't like him. Who wanted to get rid of him. The monarch, famous for his impiety, tried by every means at his disposal to reintroduce the ancient cult of Isis.
Oh, interesting. But they mean the Egyptian god.
Right, but
they mean paganism.
But interesting, right?
Yeah, not really.
It's not Wahhabism, but he's saying that we want we're this intense cult. Imagine if ISIS today was like Egyptian mythological believers. Like,
that'd be so cool.
Anubis will rise again.
I'd get behind that.
No, you wouldn't.
I'd fly drones for that.
Right, it's still
Dude, let's start beheading people for Egyptian gods.
If it was us, I think that'd be appropriation. We'd have to do it for Norse gods, but then we're just shitty Nazis at that point. We're just like crappy Aryan Brotherhood bullshit.
Kill them all and let a Norse god sort them out!
Dude, why can't paganism be cool?
Well, you know what's interesting is this story, in a similar way, kind of I would say is an equal opportunity satirizing of philosophical and religious beliefs, although it comes from a Catholic perspective because Alphonse is Catholic, and because by all accounts Jan Potocki was Catholic, although not seriously, because he was very educated and very rational. And I think he represents that through the character of Velasquez, who I want to mention too.
But it does portray the Inquisition as villains, for sure.
Oh, for sure.
Like, there's no sympathy for that.
Right. Now, Velasquez is a character I just want to bring up because he figures very much into one of my biggest interpretations of this movie, which is Velasquez is a mathematician, a geometer in the book he's called. In the book he's depicted as fairly autistic, and he kind of comes out of his shell to be with the hot Jewish girl, Rebecca. In the movie, he's not that autistic. He's kind of silly, dandy like everyone else. There's a really funny scene where some people like waylay. The Inquisition waylays him, and he's like,
and he just doesn't even say anything. He just like waves his paw.
He wags his hand at the guy, and he falls in love with Rebecca. He goes on long in the movie and even longer in the book diatribes about how he can chart human passion and how he can chart the patterns of the universe and he can chart human love and human life and all this stuff, but he can't chart dances, and all his dad wanted him to do was learn how to dance. It's the opposite of the story you usually hear.
Yeah.
The dad just wanted him to dance for reasons, and he couldn't do it because dancing has no logical formula. And I feel like that kind of relates to the structure of the stories, because while the gypsy is going 6 layers deep on a story, or 5 layers from his perspective, he's trying to chart it, and he's getting more and more difficulty in charting it.
Right.
And it's because the nature of the Saragossa Manuscript is that it's like a dance. It's this beautiful, musical, rollicking, gory, sexy, funny dance that you can't make sense of as easily as you could, easily chartable geometry,
right.
And so I think that's a big part of it, and that's one of the philosophies of it.
And there's also a discussion that he has with Rebecca in the movie where she says, it's like poetry. I keep getting closer to understanding it, and then I get farther away, but isn't that like real life?
And also they compare it in that same scene to cities where he says sometimes a street has a dead end and then new roads must be built. And so it's like someone will be telling a story and they're like, oh, I arrived at this room and then like my story kind of got boring, but I met another guy there and his story which led up to this moment.
Which is also true to life, because the idea of narrative is that you're giving stuff a beginning and an end when there is no beginning and an end to real life.
I'm glad you said that, and I think that's a really other good point, is this is very much about history, and they keep coming up with the histories of different nations and different families and different religions, and the interesting thing about the way that we tell history, the way that we teach history, is like this historical event began on this date and ended on this date. But history never begins and ends. It's just constantly going. And so there's a lot of stories where someone is like, and then I did this, and then I did that, and then we planned to lead her to escape. And then the gypsy will be like, oh, what happened next? He's like, oh, and then I'm here telling you this story. Like, that's what happened. Like, it's still happening. I'm still in the middle of it. And it's kind of like if you were talking to someone in some unfolding historical situation where they're like, and then we got pushed out of our home, and I'm like, oh, and how did it end? It's like with me sitting here telling you that I've got pushed out. I don't know what I'm going to do. And so history never ends. It just becomes current events, and that's...
Which happens multiple times throughout the movie, where someone will be telling a story and the story ends with, and then I met you, and now I'm telling you the story.
Yeah, like now we're here, and we got to deal with this. We're still in the midst of it. And so it's not so much about hearing stories that are from faraway land. It's about understanding your context in the world in every direction. Understanding if you're in a room of 5 people, you're going to start, and you're in a Saragossa Manuscript type conversation, you're going to understand where all of them came from and all the influences that influenced them to be where they are and all the people that influenced those people. And eventually they're all going to intersect, and you're going to realize that the world is just this endless lattice of different perspectives and histories constantly coming together and falling apart. And that's the beauty of it. And I feel like there's a lot of scenes that evoke that with the in the movie, with the way that they shoot them, with like a lot of music and excitement and visuals, these long tracking shots of these towns.
Right. That's another thing I wanted to say. This is obviously a cheaper movie just because it's like a Soviet Polish film, but like really beautiful set building, and I guess it's because they didn't have to build sets; they just filmed in these old towns. But it really feels like believable period piece settings. It's not done on a stage like the American movie made at the same time would have been. It's all shot on these locations,
right?
And that's so. It's if only they filmed it a little bit more interestingly, it would have been would have brought those places to life.
Yes. I thought that there was a lot of good filming, honestly, but you're right. It was a simple lay down production. It was just like, here's the story on the screen.
Also, I never ever think I would say this, but this is a movie. While I was watching it, I was like, damn, I kind of wish this movie was in color. Like, it would be so beautiful in color. And there are other movies that I've watched that I'd be like this. I remember watching The Return, this Russian movie from 2005, and thinking, oh, this movie would be better in black and white.
Right. So, no, I actually agree with you. I'd never thought about that, but you're totally right, because the entire point of this movie is like the rainbow of cultures.
Yeah.
And so color would definitely improve it. So the one other philosophical point I wanted to get to. So I think I got to the point about that I think that the whole point of this is the beauty of a lack of cohesion of narrative.
Yeah.
It's also weird how we never come out of the second layer into the
No,
first
we never
layer.
see them close the Saragossa Manuscript, or like we never see him take the French soldier prisoner or any of that. They go into the book and they never come out of the book.
I think what's really interesting about that is a lot of the joy of the movie is watching them come out of layers and feeling that feeling like you're almost cleaning up and accomplishing something, but you never get that feeling to completion. You never get to come all the way out.
Which I think also is a point.
I think it's a point because in the book, too, they never come all the way out.
Yeah.
It stays in layer 2 for the whole thing. So what I think that the point of that is, and this is the last big point I have to make, which is that I think that the major metaphysical philosophy of this movie, of this story, relates a little bit to Velasquez, the geometer, and the things he says, a little bit to Rebecca, the Kabbalist, and the things she says, but mostly to her brother, the Kabbalist, who talks about something that is, I know, an aspect of Kabbalistic thought, that we exist in one of many Sephiroths, or dimensions. You can think about this, like you said, like Inception, or you can think about this like the ending of Men in Black, right? You know what I'm talking about?
Men in Black 2.
No, the ending of Men in Black, where like the cat's collar is the universe and you come out of it.
Men in Black 2.
That's Men in Black 1.
Oh, whatever.
Anyway, the point is that it's nesting layers like a Russian doll, and that could be the nature of our universe.
Yeah.
We could exist in a story someone is telling, or we could exist in a story someone is telling of a story someone told to someone else, you know? And we could all be in our own little Vulcan Point Island universe.
All right, final notes. What did you think of... What are your final thoughts of the movie as a movie?
That was my final thought. That was my main thought. The movie as a movie...
I guess, what would you rate it?
Rate
it?
It...
Not even on a number scale, but just like, what's your opinion?
It's great. I think it's great. And I would say to people that it is intentionally sprawling, but within that sprawling, intentionally long-winded format, you've got a lot of funny, sexy, and gory fun. And it's like loud and exciting. And
yeah.
I can kind of see why someone like Jerry Garcia, who apparently donated the copy of this to the Pacific Film Archive, would like take acid and just go watch this, you know?
That sounds horrible. No. I would not want to watch this movie on acid.
I think I would.
Reading subtitles and getting chased by monster people.
You know, people like Jerry Garcia...
Constantly almost getting laid and then waking up among corpses. That's not like a good acid trip.
A lot of dreams. A lot of acid trips I've had.
I guess my final thought is that, yeah, it's a great movie. I really like it. But it doesn't... There's a caveat of it's not the great art film that a lot of European films from the same era are. It's not... It doesn't have the inventiveness of Fellini, and it doesn't have the, philosophical roundness of Bergman. And it doesn't just have the pure artistry of, like, a lot of other European art films that we could talk about. It's just kind of a sprawling, picaresque story that's told as a story. And for that, it's cool. And the stories are really good, and it's very funny, and the horror's good. But, like, it really drops off in the last hour for me. And, like, maybe it was because I had somewhere to be, and I was, like, getting kind of anxious about the movie ending. But it really, like, starts to get dull as it goes on. In just the last 40 minutes or so, once we're no longer seeing demons and monsters, and that might sound like an 8-year-old child... Like, I want more demons and monsters, but I wanted more demons and monsters.
Why didn't the Wolfman show up?
No, seriously! They kept telling us the Wolfman was going to show up.
Well, the Wolfman eventually killed himself with a silver bullet to the head. And that man was Jan Potocki. And that man brought us this amazing film. I disagree with Harry. I think it's good all the way through. I will say this. It's inconsistent. You're 100% right. It's inconsistent. But it's like you're getting a bunch of little movies for the price of one movie. And it's about the nesting, and it's about frustrating you a little bit because you even watch the characters be like, are you fucking kidding? Are you now telling me a story and a story and a story and a story? And they're like, just shut the fuck up and listen.
Yeah, and that part doesn't bother me at all.
At one point even, Lope Suave says, if you don't stop telling me stories, I'm going to fight you. And Busquero says, okay, stabs him and says, as I was saying.
Yeah,
and it goes right back to the story. And sometimes it's like the movie does that to you. You know? The movie's like, shut the fuck up. I'm not done. I'm going deeper, in fact. here's a story someone else told me. You know what I mean? Yeah. Anyway, so I love it. Harry gave his thing about thinking it falls off. I don't think it falls off. I think as 3-hour European movies go, this is pretty good. I think you'll be entertained because I think it's a visual delight and it's funny.
It's fun and entertaining. It's not a movie that sticks with you or changes you, I guess is what I'm saying.
I totally disagree.
It's not like Tarkovsky or,
I totally disagree. I think that this movie stuck in my head for 10 to 12 years. And about a decade later, I was like, oh my God, I want to watch that again. Like, I still have it in my head rattling around. I still am thinking about it. And now I'm looking at it, and it might be because there's a lot of beautiful women in it and a lot of almost three ways and a lot of like random horror and gore and anxiety attacks and fright and paranoia. And maybe that's just what my life feels like, is like all of that, combined in an interesting way. Plus all the mysticism.
Yeah.
And the metaphysical aspect. And it's very male fantasy too, as written by a man, and it's got that Robinson Crusoe adventure level of like you go out into the desert and you win a vast fortune and your 2 wives and there's monsters. It has that adventure story kind of thing, swashbuckling fun to it.
Right.
So I really dig it, and I think that it's definitely a good first Polish film.
Oh, I wouldn't say it's the first Polish film you should watch. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
No, definitely not an introduction. People will hate Polish movies.
Well,
no, show them Possession.
Oh, that counts? That's in English.
It's in English, but it's a Polish movie. Okay, show them Ashes and Diamonds.
I haven't seen that one.
Okay. Well, God damn it. How many Polish movies have you seen?
I think this one.
And, no, I know what the first Polish movie we should watch is La Bête.
Oh, God.
That's actually French. But Polish director.
Same thing. Same shit.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, watch the Decalogue.
Oh my God! Oh,
10 hours of Catholic torture.
You just reminded me. I've seen the Three Colors one, which is by that Polish guy.
But that's French too.
About France.
Yeah.
Right.
They all moved to France.
Anyway, so that's the Saragossa Manuscript by Wojciech Has.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say it's great. Harry's gonna say it's good, and we're both gonna be back to do 3-part episode on slashers for October.
Yeah.
So that's our next.
Hope you guys are ready for it.
Undertaking. I just want to give a big shout out to Anthony Vigil, who is an ex-student of mine, who's our biggest and perhaps only current fan.
Woo!
Anthony, this is all for you, buddy. He lent us a bunch of soundproofing equipment, which is hopefully working right now. The window's open, so it negates a lot of the soundproofing, but we need that fresh air. And Harry's been clunking his drink around, which Anthony told me to avoid, so whatever, sorry.
Anthony, thank you so much for the equipment. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And that's all we got to say today, I suppose.
All right, well... Y'all enjoy Polish cinema, and we'll be back for Halloween.
Yeah.